Hey Lee, how are you?
Hello, Jeff. Nice to be with you today.
Thank you for joining me on Indispensable Appraisers podcast. Hey, first question, what is our valuation industry winning at? I mean, you guys are Opteon, you're an international firm, so this will be an interesting perspective on the industry in the US and in general. So what is the appraisal industry winning at from that perspective?
And when I think about what's transpired in the recent past, there's a few things we are winning. We'll try to be glass half full, not half empty. I think we've really improved actually around air and independence recently. Fannie and Freddie re-clarified their air policies, put a little bit more teeth in it. And I can say as a practicing appraiser that the differences in pressure to appraiser today are night and day different from where they were, leading up to the great financial crisis. So back then, it was much more commonplace for a customer to subtly or even overtly try to pressure an appraiser to do what they wanted to do or behave in a way they want them to behave and get outcomes they wanted. And I just don't see that's become a pretty rare thing. It's become so rare that, I don't think about managing the business around it anymore. So that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. So the industry has other pressures and challenges, but I think commissioned salespeople and customers, really trying to hold the appraiser hostage has been mitigated quite a bit. I think the attention to bias and diversity is a good thing. Um, it is a fact that demographically our industry has been very male and very white. And my humble opinion is I don't think that was malicious or by design. And I forget who explained it this way, but because appraising has historically been a cottage industry, kind of a mom and pop industry, and therefore a lot of appraisers get into the industry through a relative, through a family member, a mother, a father, or a relative. That didn't really open the door for diversity. It kept a very insular community of appraisers. But regardless of why it transpired, the ADI initiative by the GSEs and now endorsed by a lot of major lenders, which is putting some funding behind training and outreach for diverse trainees to enter the profession is a fantastic thing. So happy to see that. And slowly but surely, I'm seeing, some more tech adoption. That's both a win and a challenge. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I'd like to see more progress on that front.
When you talk about mom and pop, you guys are obviously not being, I believe, what started out of Australia, New Zealand, now US.
Yeah, so I was had several partners and we built a firm called Value Centric into a large staff model. So we were not an appraisal management company, but we were generally a national staff appraiser business. We sold that business to Opteon in 2021. As you mentioned, they are based originally in Australia. And the reason we decided to fold into Opteon is they had become exactly what we aspired to be. They started as a smaller staff firm, they merged, they acquired, and they invested a lot of money into technology. Good cultural company, very results and objective oriented. So, by distinction, in Australia, our typical turn time is around 2 days for a residential assignment. For a small to medium asset size commercial, it's sub 5 days now, I believe, turn time. Probably more impressive on the residential side is the revision rate that comes back from customers hovers around 1%.
Oh, well.
In the US, on the residential side, that hovers around 30%. So that is a monumental difference and a monumental gain in efficiency not just for the appraiser, but for the customer, for the borrower, for every stakeholder in the process. Every time a human has to retouch something that they've already touched, it's a waste of time and money. So that's a big deal. And the way that was accomplished is in the other countries that we do business, we manage the entire process end to end, 100% on our own tech ecosystem. So we're close to finalizing that here. We're replicating that business model, and that's exciting. And that's why I'm now with Opteon.
What is the delta between 1% and 30% in the US? What causes that?
A lot of things, historically lenders in the US have a lot of what's called overlays. So not knowing whether the loan's going to end up with Fannie, Freddie, secondary investor. Anytime anybody has ever kicked back a file since the dawn of time, somebody has tried to write a rule around that to prevent that from happening again. And that just accrued and accrued and accrued. In other countries, first of all, there's a lot more lending consolidation. So you have fewer lenders that are stakeholders in play, where we have, a million different mortgage lenders in the United States. So just the diversity and breadth of the customer. And I think they've learned the lesson that we haven't learned yet, to focus on what actually matters. I think any appraiser is painfully aware that they get a considerable number of revision requests for things that have no real material impact on the credibility of the appraisal. And we've managed to eliminate that back and forth in other locations. So, and it'll be interesting because, Fannie and Freddie are working on the new UAD data set, which is actually broader and bigger than the current data set. So does more data mean more opportunity to trigger, a customer to ask for something else? We don't know the answer to that question yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it seems like some of the items that the industry is winning at is also our greatest challenges. You mentioned tech adoption as being one. What did you mean by that?
We see innovation, but it's very fragmented. Historically, and another reason we joined Opteon was we knew we needed to invest a lot of money in tech to get where we wanted to be at the end of the day. And they had the capital that we did not, frankly, to invest as deeply as we knew the investment required. So investment, appraising is a smaller subset of the mortgage market. It's not a huge industry, and as such, it doesn't attract the big dollars to really reinvent the way things are done. So we see fragmentation in the tech. We see people trying to solve different pieces of the puzzle, but I have not seen anyone attempt to holistically solve the entire, value chain of appraising from top to bottom.
Got it. And as far as, the greatest challenge, would you say tech is the greatest challenge, or are there other headwinds to our industry that we're facing looking forward?
Well, I think one of our challenges is demographics. We have a demographic time bomb in our industry where we're aging out, and the economics have not been great to bring in fresh blood, new talent. So I think we got a demographic challenge. We've got, and we've seen the PRIA program be introduced. It's not gotten a lot of traction. Opteon actually developed, the preliminary part of PRIA. We've paused on that because when the market contracted so violently, it just wasn't feasible economically to spend a lot of money on an expensive program to bring in new appraisers when there wasn't work for new appraisers. But, with the current qualifications set forth by the foundation, it's just a hard industry to get into. I think it's unnecessarily difficult. I've joked you can become a doctor more easily than you can become a real estate appraiser. And so and I didn't come up with this idea, but someone smarter than I am, in my past once suggested that, maybe the path to becoming an appraiser, first of all, I think the licensing category serves no purpose at all now. I think that's completely irrelevant. I think we should have certified res and certified gen. I think it's more than adequate for the distinctions of what skill sets people need in the market. And there's so much stigma and limitations placed around trainees. It's gotten better, but it's still difficult to drive work through a trainee. So it gets back to the economics issue. I think it would make more sense to have a very rigorous education and testing to become certified. And once you're certified, you're certified. There is no trainee, there is no license. You're either certified or you're not. And then if we want to put some stipulations where, a newly minted certified appraiser could not just walk out and hang a shingle on day one and start doing business on their own, maybe they have to, work within another company for a period of time. I'm just speaking off the cuff.
Sure.
But I think we need to get rid of that trainee stigma and impediment to actually earn a living. I think the license category just is in no man's land and serves no real meaningful role. So I think the path to go from 0 to certified should be rigorous but fast.
You also mentioned that Opteon had some characteristics that you liked, what you aspire to. You mentioned culture. Do you think that's maybe the first step in attracting the younger talent, that because it's such a long path, do you think it starts with culture to where they have a supportive environment? Here's some education. Here's to get me from point A to point B, especially for the younger generation, where, if they talk to people that are in the industry, it's kind of a mixed bag what kind of answer. If you say, should I go into the industry, and somebody's been in the industry for a while, I think they're getting mixed results. So do you think culture might be the first step? Obviously technology, but do you think culture might be the first?
Well, you just kind of stole my thunder. I was going to say culture and technology, because the younger generation loves tech, understands the power of tech, and the way we collect and analyze data is still pretty primitive. It's kind of embarrassing. So, and in Australia, they had the same demographics. So, a couple of decades ago, they looked a lot like the US. They were, 60 years old. They were mom and pop. They were not tech enabled. And now, and I'm throwing these off the top of my head because I'm not an Australian, so I might get this wrong, but I think the demographic, is now sub 40 years old, so much younger and very tech enabled. Obviously, to deliver the kind of turnaround and the results that I gave, you don't accomplish without a lot of technology. So I think the younger crowd wants what we want, which is we want analysts. We have an army of form fillers. And if you're an appraiser listening to me, I'm not trying to insult appraisers. I am one. And I think we've been driven down that path. I don't think when I say we have an army of form fillers, it's not necessarily because people are stupid or lazy or that's what they want to do, but the industry kind of shoved us into that lane. And with tech should eliminate the form filling, the data entry, and it should allow an appraiser to do what we're paid to do, which is to bring human expertise, local market knowledge, judgment, go from the, appraising as art and science. If it was just science, we'd have AVMs and you and I wouldn't be sitting here because we wouldn't exist. So we bridge the art part of the appraisal process with the science, but we need more science. We need better analytics to enable faster and more defensible and reliable opinions of value.
Cool. Appreciate that. You mentioned, appraisers love comps, and don't know if you know the history of it, but you mentioned the Australian. So if the Aussies are a comp to what our industry could do, if they were in that same position, you said a few decades ago, not so much how they did it, but who did that? Who moved that needle for them? We have the Appraisal Institute, we have a foundation, we have some disparate things, but what did they have? Was it a government thing? Was it a groundswell of just entrepreneurism? Was it universities? What drove that? Government?
So as it's been explained to me, the lending community, believe it or not,
Hmm.
actually drove it. And so
Wow.
they were managing very small mom and pop service providers throughout the country. And so they didn't have companies with scale, with tech, and they didn't want that inefficiency of having to chase down the one appraiser in this township to do it. And they didn't just obviously snap their fingers and say, go do this. But as people saw a desire and kind of a demand for more larger, more sophisticated service providers, there were some firms that rolled up, as Opteon did, into larger unified companies. And then that gave them the financial wherewithal to invest in the tech and the training and all the things that go with that. So now there's only a handful of larger service providers. I think the same may hold true in Canada. I'm not an expert on the Canadian market. I hear things, but I think Canada is a little bit more similar. Australia, New Zealand, in that the number of lending institutions is much smaller and the number of, larger service providers is also smaller.
So the lending community created consolidation, is what you're saying?
They help stimulate it. I think they expressed a preference on being able to funnel more work through fewer providers that could handle, that kind of bandwidth and that capacity and that geographic reach. So those that heard that and fulfilled that request, that vision, won the business. And I think, now there are, fewer mom and pop operations. I think boutique operations still exist, but I think the vast majority of the mortgage work, so to speak, that we have here, I think that flows through, the larger companies that have been able to invest in the tools and the training.
That brings up a good point. And again, sorry to give you a hard question on a Friday. Thank you for joining me. Yeah. Do you think should and could that happen in the US? Meaning, what are the trends? Is the mom and pops kind of going to slowly go away and be replaced by the national, the larger firms? What I'm kind of mixing two questions, so I know this is a it's
Now,
all
I know where you're going with this. I think it will. I think we're starting to see it. I think it's actually gone slower than I anticipated. And first of all, the United States is a giant country. So, and as such, as I mentioned, we have a lot more variety and lenders and every kind of stakeholder in the real estate food chain. We just have more of them, more uniqueness, more variety, more quantity. But if you look at every industry, it's kind of occurred. Some would argue, and not for the best, some would bemoan the loss of all the community bookstores that Amazon disrupted. Some would, I would say coffee shops are actually coming back, but Starbucks disrupted the coffee shop business. So it's not unique to appraising. I think you see it. It's kind of a natural economic cycle. And I think the customers, like the breadth, they like the consistency, they like the cybersecurity is becoming a big thing. We read about that every day. So having the ability to have more sophisticated data management, security protocols. And then tech is just, there are not many places you can point to in our economy that tech is not having a major impact. And we are in a data and information and analytics business. And that is ground zero for tech innovation. And yet we have been slow to see it. So I think it would be naive to think that our industry is not going to change dramatically, given that the crux of what we do is collect and analyze data.
So given that, how do we not become the taxi driver, Crown Vic versus Uber and Lyft model? So if you're a king looking forward, you're the king of the valuation space. What levers would you push or pull to kind of improve the future of what you just kind of laid out?
Wow, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I have an answer because macroeconomic forces are very powerful. So I think any one company, I don't know, can push or pull a lever to control where it goes, unless you invent, Uber invented something that didn't exist. If that person had come to me and said, "Hey, I've got an idea. I'm going to convince people to, basically rent my car and be a de facto taxi driver," I think we all would have said, "You're nuts. That'll never happen." Same with Airbnb. You're going to rent out a room in your house. So who am I to say what may or may not happen in the future? I do think it'll change. I'm not smart enough to say exactly what we're going to look like in 5 years. I think we are going to look very different in 5 years. And I think tech will define a lot of that one way or another.
Definitely. Any other topics we didn't hit upon that you'd like to talk about?
The only thing I would say that I don't think we've really talked about is the training component. That's another thing, as a larger company that I enjoy that we're able to invest in. Historically, as I mentioned, because training was often through family members, and it may have been very good training. There have also been periods in this industry, periods of boom, particularly pre-licensing, where the training was inadequate because there was easy money to be made. People would hire people to work for them as an appraiser or an apprentice or a trainee, whatever you want to call them, and kind of throw work at them and not train them to the extent that they should have been and deserve to be trained. So, we do invest a lot in Opteon Academy to train not just trainees starting from scratch, at ground zero, but even anybody we hire, we put through some pretty rigorous training and ongoing learning and development. Education never ends. I take training and coursework all the time, just like everybody else. And it's not all appraisal facing. We train against bias issues and fair housing and cybersecurity and things that are important to our customers that go beyond just how do you prepare an appraisal report. So training, having tech is important, and innovating is important, but having a well-trained workforce in our industry is also equally important.
Oh, well, Lee, I definitely appreciate your time joining me on the podcast today.
I appreciate you having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.